Good evening, friends and study partners. I hope you all are well and safe. We're going to be learning tonight chapter 2 of Tractate Shabbos. Tonight's class is dedicated in loving memory of my dear mother, Rivka Bas Harav Shleimai. The Mishna in chapter 2 is going to begin with what materials are appropriate to use for Shabbos candles. So what wicks are appropriate and what wicks are not appropriate, as well as oils that are appropriate for lighting Shabbos candles. The Mishnah begins, "Bameh madlikin uvameh ein madlikin," with which substances may we light Shabbos candles and which substances may we not light Shabbos candles. Ein madlikin loy v'lechesh, we may not kindle the Shabbos lights with lechesh, which is cedar bast. This is a fibrous inner bark of the cedar tree. V'loy v'chaysin, nor with uncarded flax. Uncarded flax, the carding process straightens it out and would allow it to become a proper wick. But before the carding process is complete, so the oil does not draw well into the wick. V'loy v'cholof, and not with floss silk. And again, the reason for this is because such a wick will not draw the oil correctly, and it won't burn evenly. Nor with willow bast. This is the woolly substance that's found beneath the bark of a willow tree. Nor with desert fiber. This is comes from a long grass and that can be braided to be used as a wick. And again, it doesn't burn nicely. Nor with sea moss. Sea moss can be collected off rocks or the bottom of boats, and it can be dried out and used as a wick. However, our Mishnah is telling us that this substance does not burn nicely, and hence it is not good for to be used. It's not appropriate to use this for Shabbos candles. Now the Mishnah moves on to oils. V'loy v'zefes, v'loy v'shayva, nor may we light Shabbos candles with pitch or with wax. The Mishnah here is referring to in this instance, when it's molten. But if you create a candle out of the wax or out of the pitch, so then this is a different story. This is designed to be used as a candle, and it would burn nicely, just like many people light actual candles and don't use oils for their Shabbos lamps. So again, the Mishnah here is talking about a situation where you just melted down wax and then stuck a wick in it. So this is not a nice way of lighting a candle because it doesn't burn evenly. V'loy v'shemen kik, not with cottonseed oil. V'loy v'shemen sreifa, nor may you use shemen sreifa. Now, let me stop here for a moment and let's finish off the earlier cases. All of the earlier cases of items that you cannot use for lighting Shabbos candles, the reason is because they don't burn nicely. Shabbos candles are meant to bring peace into the home, and using substandard wicks or substandard oils is going to flicker, and it actually can be anxiety producing as opposed to peace bringing into the house because they don't burn well. However, now the Mishnah talks about something entirely new. And the Mishnah says, "V'lei v'shemen sreifa," not with oil that must be burnt. What is oil that must be burnt? So the law is that truma oils that become contaminated, that become tameh, ritually impure, may not be eaten by a kohen. However, they may be used as fuel for a fire for the kohen. And the kohen could allow it. There's rules that we'll have elsewhere in the Mishnah about who can use and for what purposes shemen sreifa can be used. This is oil that has become contaminated, truma oil that has become contaminated. Now, the Mishnah, without clearly specifying this, it'll explain this later, is talking about a specific case here. Because ordinarily speaking, a kohen could use shemen sreifa. And so if he has olive oil, that's truma, and it becomes impure, so his wife should be allowed to use it for Shabbos candles. So why does the Mishnah here tell us that they can't? So the Mishnah here is talking about a specific case. The Mishnah here is talking about a case where Friday, Erev Shabbos, was a Yom Tov, was a holiday. And there's a rule, Ein Serfin Kedoshim B'Yom Tov. You're not allowed to burn contaminated things that consecrated or holy things on Yom Tov, which means if holy things became things that are for the Beis Hamikdash, for a korban, they became impure, so you're not allowed to burn them on Yom Tov. Now, because truma is holy, so the rabbis prohibited burning of shemen sreifa on Yom Tov because you're burning something that's contaminated, and one may then go ahead and think that you can burn contaminated holy items on Yom Tov and do this with other things. Alternatively, one can argue that something that was impure from before Yom Tov was considered muktzah. And so since it was already muktzah, was set aside, so it is not allowed to be used for Yom Tov or even for Shabbos in this case, because you would be lighting it for the Shabbos candles. So that's the reason why you cannot use shemen sreifa on Yom Tov, that is Erev Shabbos. Nachum Amodi Eimer, Nachum, the Madi says, Madlikim b'chelev mevushal. You can use fats from a sheep's tail that is cooked, and this is not a prohibited fats. This is a permitted fats that can be eaten from a sheep's tail. In any case, if you boil it up, according to Nachum Amodi, this would be an acceptable oil or fuel for the Shabbos lamps. The Chachamim say, Echad mavushal ve'echad she'eni mavushal. Regardless of whether it is cooked or not cooked, boiled or not boiled, ein madlikim boy. You cannot use it because, again, the sages would be concerned that if you're going to allow the cooked fat of a sheep's tail, which does burn okay, one would then go ahead and use the unboiled fats of a sheep's tail, which does not burn well. So again, the Chachamim don't want you to confuse between the two, so they just ban the practice outright. Beis, Mishnah Beis. The Mishnah tells us again why, and this time it's going to explain why you cannot use it, why you can't use shemen sreifa, In the previous Mishnah, it wasn't so clear. Ein madlikim b'shemen tzreifa b'yom tov. In case you were wondering in the previous Mishnah why we said you can't use shemen tzreifa for Shabbos candles, here the Mishnah says it's for specifically a case of Yom Tov. And as we explained in the previous Mishnah, Rabbi Yishmael says, Ein madlikin bi'itran. You cannot light with tar. The issue here is that, and now one may wonder why you can't use tar. Tar burns very evenly. Says the Mishnah, Shabbos, because of the honor of Shabbos. When you burn tar, it stinks. And so if you're going to burn tar in your home on Shabbos, before Shabbos, and now it's burning on Shabbos, the whole house is going to smell. And the reason why we light Shabbos candles is to bring peace into the home, and now the whole home is foul smelling. The Chachamim allow any oils can be used. B'shemen shumshumin, they say sesame oil, b'shemen geizim, nut oil, b'shemen tznoinos, radish oil, b'shemen dagim, which is fish oil, b'shemen pakuos, colocynth oil, bi'itron with tar, with naphtha. All of these oils are allowed to be used for, according to the Chachamim, all of these are allowed to be used for Shabbos candles. Rabbi Tarfon says, the only oil that's allowed for Shabbos candles is olive oil. Now, although everybody disagrees with him, as you see, as we explained, but others would agree that olive oil would be the preferable oil to use because it produces a better flame than any of these other previous cases. Mishnah Gimel. Kol hayetzim min ha'etz ein madlikin boy. We cannot light Shabbos candles with anything, any product that comes off of a tree. Ela pishtan, except for flax. V'chol hayetzim min ha'etz, and any tree product, ein mitame tumas oilin, does not contract, is not subject to contamination, ritual impurity from an ohel. So an ohel, for example, if you have a corpse, a simple example, you have a corpse under an awning or a tent, or in a tent, for example, or in a house for that matter, and a person goes into this house, so the person becomes tummy. However, products that come out of a tree are not subject to this ritual contamination that is produced by a shelter. Elo pishtin, except for flax. Flax is a product from the tree, and that does have the ability to contract ritual impurity. Now, before we continue, it's important to understand something about impurity when it comes to fabrics. A fabric is able to become impure. We know this from many examples where a person becomes impure, and not only does he need to immerse himself in a mikveh to regain purity, but he would be required to immerse his clothing as well. So clothing and fabric is definitely, by all accounts, able to contract ritual impurity. However, there is a minimum size of a fabric that a fabric must be in order to be able to contract ritual impurity. So in Hebrew it's called Roi Lekabel Tuma. The measurement is 3 finger widths by 3 finger widths. So that's a very small piece of material that we're talking about here. I'm going to say probably about 2 inches by 2 inches, maybe less. In any case, what happens if you have a small piece of fabric that's exactly 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths? Now you take this fabric, it's a small fabric, and you twist it into a wick, and you want to use this wick to light the Shabbos candles. So ordinarily speaking, there's no issue. You can do what you want. However, similar to the case that we were talking about earlier, if this happens to be a Friday that is also a holiday, so says the Mishna, when you have psilas habeged shekipla v'loi hivhavo, so if you have this piece of cloth that's exactly 3 hand breadths by 3 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, and now you've rolled it into a wick, and then what happens is you want to use this as a wick on Yom Tov to light your Shabbos candles. It's a Friday and it's Yom Tov. So says the Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer holds Tmeya. First of all, the fact that you have not yet, so says the Mishnah, you have twisted it, but you did not singe the top of it. Generally speaking, before you light a wick, it's appropriate to singe the top and then put it out. Indeed, this is really generally in a Jewish household, this is generally done by the husband. It's important for a husband to participate in the Shabbos candle lighting. So how does he do it? We know the wives, the women, the daughters over 3 years old, they're the ones who light the Shabbos candles. So what is the husband's participation? He lights the candle and he blows it out. He singes the wick on the top. So now, this is the appropriate way to set up a wick. So says the Mishnah, a person who twisted this cloth, that's 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, but he did not singe the top. Rabbi Eliezer says, it's still able to contract ritual impurity because you haven't singed the top. If you had singed the top, you burn off just a drop, and now the fabric is shortened by just a drop. It's a little bit less than 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, so it no longer can contract impurity. But in this case, because you did not singe it, it's still a legitimate 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths. So says Rabbi Eliezer, Tmeya, it is able to contract ritual impurity. Doesn't mean it's actually impure, but it means it's able to contract ritual impurity. And you're not allowed to use this on Yom Tov to light your Shabbos candles. And the reason is because you're creating a whole change in this item. Previously, it was able to contract impurity, and now you cannot. It cannot. So you're changing its entity, and that is not allowed on Yom Tov. It's a significant change. Rabbi Akiva says, Tahira, once you've taken this piece of cloth that's exactly 3 finger breadths by 3 finger breadths, and you've twisted it into a wick, it's no longer considered a sizable piece of cloth. It's no longer able to contract ritual impurity. And so therefore, madlikin boy, by lighting it for your Shabbos candles while it's Yom Tiv, because again, we're talking about a case where it's Friday, and Friday is Yom Tiv, so you're not making a significant change in this small piece of fabric. Mishna Dalet. Leikov Adam Sheferes Shel Beitza V'yamaleno Shemen. A person may not puncture an egg, empty its contents, V'yamaleno Shemen, and then put in instead of the egg, you get rid of the egg, and you pour in oil. Now, why would a person do this? So, in order to understand this, you have to understand one of the tricks that they would do in the olden days when they wanted to create a fire. So they would have a little bowl, and in this bowl, they would put a little bit of oil, and then they would put a wick, and then what they would do is sometimes is they would take a dripper. In this case, we're talking about an egg that's filled with oil, and they lie it on the side, and so it's like suspended right by this bowl, and it drips into this bowl. So now, says the Mishnah here, before Shabbos, one may not employ this trick or one of these eggs or one of these drippers to drip into the bowl and use this for their Shabbos candles. Why not? The reason is because we're afraid that the person on Shabbos will then remove this egg of oil. Why would he remove the egg of oil? Maybe he needs the oil for a salad or anything else. He wants to season something with oil. So here he has this oil that's dripping into the bowl of fire, bowl of oil that's being lit, and now he can remove this. He can remove this egg and use this. Now the issue is that he's going to cause the fire to go out earlier than was set before Shabbos, and the rabbis disallowed this because you're extinguishing a fire earlier than its predestined time. So again, let's read the Mishnah again smoothly. A person may not puncture an egg and fill it up with oil and put it by a lamp bowl so that it will drip into the bowl. Continues the Mishnah, even if it's an earthenware, it's not an egg, but it's this device is made of earthenware. And Rabbi Yehuda allows it. Now, why should it make a difference if it's of earthenware? Because an egg is clean. So a person might be more tempted to remove the egg and use the oil in there to, as we said, for example, to season a salad. But if it's an earthenware device, so it's not so clean, and a person would be less likely to do that. Rabbi Yehuda in either case allows for it. According to all opinions, if this device, this dripping device, is designed by the manufacturer to begin with, so mutter, because it's attached now. So when you fill it up, you're not going to be tempted to remove this because it's designed this way and it's stuck in the place. And so you wouldn't be able to remove the oil and use it for a different purpose. Further, says the Mishnah, here again, the Mishnah tells us another rule. You have two bowls, one bowl sitting next to another. You put some oil in one bowl, and then you put in a wick, but it's a long wick, and the wick goes up above the side of this bowl into another bowl where it has a separate reservoir of oil. So again, here we're concerned that somebody's going to remove the second bowl on Shabbos, thereby diminishing the time that the oil will burn. Rabbi Yehuda matter, and Rabbi Yehuda allows for this as well. So there's three cases here, and they're all actually a bit different. The Gemara on Daf Chav Tes Amud Beis explains the difference between these three cases. If we had only the Mishnah had mentioned 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3, we wouldn't know the other cases. First of all, the first one we already explained. If the Mishnah only said a case of Rabbi Yehuda allows it in all three, but the other sages don't. So let's understand the reasoning of the other sages. If the other sages had only brought up a case of an egg, so we would say that the reason that an egg is because a person is likely to remove it because it's clean oil. But one may argue that those who argue with Rabbi Yehuda would allow it if it is a case of an earthenware reservoir, because again, it's not all that appetizing to use oil that's in an earthenware reservoir. So we need to have both. Now, if we were to say that if it only gave, so if it was if we only mentioned eggshell, we would think one is allowed for the with an earthenware vessel. Now, the earthenware vessel is different from the egg. The egg is suspended above, where the earthenware vessel is not. So when it's suspended above, I'm sorry, the opposite. When you have this earthenware vessel that's suspended above, so you could say it's easily recognizable. Where the egg, it's not easily recognizable, so one may argue that those who disagree with Rabbi Yehuda would allow it. And in this particular case where it's two separate bowls altogether, so one would assume that perhaps Rabbi Yehuda disagrees in such a case where it's so easy. It's a separate bowl, and you just pull the bowl away. It's clean and it's separate. It's not recognizable. You don't necessarily. It's not even in the same area as where your flame is burning. So one may think that Rabbi Yehuda agrees with the other sages in such a case because one is more likely to remove the bowl. So again, as the Gemara explains over there in depth, all three of these cases are not just repetitive and redundant, but all three of these cases are needed. Again, I explained it very briefly and quickly. For further clarification, see the Gemara on Chav Tes Amid Beis. Mishna Hey. Hamachabes Aner. Here the Mishnah is telling us whether or not a person is going to be chayav achatas, or liable for violating Shabbos in the following instances. If you have a person who has a flame, a Shabbos lamp lit, and he extinguishes the flame because he's afraid of non-Jews, some Mefarshim explain that it could be that it was a day of idol worship where the non-Jews or the heathens, the idol worshippers, only allowed lamps to be lit for their idols, and all others were prohibited. So he had lit it, and then came Shabbos, he realized that it's a bad time to have a light on, because if one of these idol worshippers will catch him, they will do him harm. Mipnei listim. A person has a lamp and then he recognizes, he comes to his attention that there are robbers around. So he's afraid that they will find him and rob him and do him harm. Or if a person extinguishes a fire because of a ruach ra is an evil spirit. A person is depressed, and certain depressions are eased by darkness. We're talking about deep depression. We're not talking about a small depression. We're talking about a deep illness of depression, which can be, of course, very dangerous. And alternatively, says the Mishnah, im bishvil ha'chela sheyishan, or if or a person extinguishes a fire because there's a person who's ill, and if he doesn't sleep, if this person, the ill person, is bothered by the light of the candle, and he needs sleep to regain his health. So in all of these cases, if a person extinguishes the fire, the candle, potter, he is exempt from from violating Shabbos. Now, generally speaking, the Mishnah should, when there's a pekuach nefesh, when there's a danger to life, so Shabbos is suspended. So the term potter is a little suspicious here because it should be saying mutter. You're allowed to do this. Not only that, when you have a situation where Shabbos needs to be violated to protect life, not only is it allowed, but it's mandatory. You have to. So some of the commentaries say that this term potter, which implies that it's not allowed, but you can do it. If you do it, you won't have to have a chatas or have any of the other punishments, appropriate punishments. So they explain that it's just because at the end it says chayiv in the Mishnah. Assume we're going to say chayiv, so it uses a similar term, chayiv versus potter. However, one can argue that the Mishnah doesn't give detailed examples of the scenarios that we're talking about. So, not in all cases of a little bit of danger do you just put out a fire. And so, perhaps we need to quantify exactly what levels we're talking about here. For example, depression, we said. There's majorly depressed, in which a person could be a danger to themselves or others. And then you can have a person who's minorly depressed. Just because he's minorly depressed doesn't give him the license to extinguish a fire on Shabbos so that he can sleep. So that he will feel a little bit better. So perhaps that's why we say potter, because again, these ideas have not been quantified in the Mishnah. Now, what happens if a person, he lit a candle or a lamp, and he wants to spare, he doesn't want it to run down, to burn out. He wants to save some of the candle or some of the lamp, some of the oil. Or if he wants to spare the oil. He doesn't want the wick to burn down, he wants to reuse the wick. So in all of these cases, he has a purpose that's not for life-saving purposes, and he's doing it because he wants a benefit out of this. In all of these cases, chayav, he would be liable. Rabbi Yossi exempts him in all of these cases. Chutz min hapsila, except in the case of the wick, because it turns it into charcoal. Now, the argument here is about melacha she'ein tzricha legufa. Whenever you do when a person does an action that he doesn't need for that. So the question is are you liable on Shabbos, biblically? From the rabbis, of course, this is not allowed. But on a biblical level, are you liable on Shabbos? According to Rabbi Yossi, no. Which means, for example, let's use the example of the Mishnah here. A person has a flame going, and he extinguishes the flame. Not because he wants the charcoal that's going to be on the tip of the wick now. He has no use for that. He needs the oil because he wants the oil, for example, to spice a salad. So now, he doesn't need, he's not looking to extinguish the fire because he wants to extinguish the fire. He's extinguishing the fire because he wants the oil. As far as he's concerned, if he can get the oil without extinguishing the fire, that would even be better. Which means if he had other oil available to him, he would use that. That's what he's looking for. So he's not looking for the extinguished fire, he's looking for the oil. That's a malacha she'ein tzricha legufa. He's doing an action which is prohibited by the Torah, but he's not doing it for the prohibited action's purpose. So according to Rabbi Yossi, a person would be exempt on a biblical level. The others say, no, this is not allowed. And so therefore, they say that even though you didn't do it because you needed the flame to be extinguished, you did it because you wanted the oil, nevertheless you are chayav. But even Rabbi Yossi would hold someone liable in the case of the wick, because again, the wick creates a different thing. Vav. Al sholish averes nashim meses. Once we're talking about Shabbos candles and candles, so the Mishnah now brings us an entirely different halacha and tells us that there are 3 transgressions that because of these three transgressions, unfortunately, at times they cause women to die during childbirth. Noshim mesis b'shas leidasa. Al she'enin zehiris b'nida. A woman who is not careful with the nida laws, these are the taras hamishpacha laws. Uvechala, a woman who is not careful to separate chala. That's when a woman makes a large enough dough, approximately 43 eggs size. She has to separate challah. We all know this. So this is generally done by the woman who's baking the challah in the house, but a man would also be required to separate challah if he's making a dough. Uvadlaka saner, and the Shabbos candle. So a woman who's lax in these areas, or in any of these areas, unfortunately this causes death during childbirth, which means, in other words, that a woman should be super careful for these three mitzvahs. And indeed, these three mitzvahs are very, very powerful for for a woman and for the Jewish home. A Jewish home gains so much from these three special mitzvahs. So once again, Taras HaMishpacha, which is the laws of Nida, Chala, separating the Chala, and Shabbos candles. Zayin. Before Shabbos, a person has to ask and remind everyone for three things. Isartem, have you tithed? He has to ask all the household members, did you give Meiser? Because Meiser is not allowed to be separated on Shabbos. Iraftem, did you make an Erev? If you're planning on going beyond the 2,000 cubits distance beyond your abode or beyond your town, so you need to make an Erev Tchumen, which would give you an additional 2,000. We've been speaking about this a lot in Masechet Erevin. Hadliko Saner, did you light the candles? Again, that's obviously when we're getting closer to Shabbos. Sofik Cheshecha, Sofik Ein Cheshecha. Let's say now you're past the 18 minutes and you're just past it, and so it's a suffix at this point. It's a time called Bein Hashmashas. Ein Me'asrin Esavadai. One may not take Meiser during this Bein Hashmashas period on produce that is certainly tevel, that certainly that Meiser has not been separated from it. Ve'ein matbilin es hakelim. One may not immerse contaminated vessels at that time because you're fixing them. And if it's Shabbos, so then you're fixing them on Shabbos. Again, Bein Hashmashas is a time that we don't know whether it belongs to the day or night, so we have to act in a stringent manner. You can't light Shabbos candles at that time, again, because that's a biblical prohibition, and perhaps it's actually already Shabbos. However, produce which was previously tithed by an Amma Aretz, and so we don't know if we can trust him by a person who's not scrupulous in these laws. So we don't know, did he really do it? Even if he did it, did he do it properly? That's called the Mai. It has a special law because perhaps it actually was already tithed. Tithing on Shabbos is a rabbinical prohibition, so they can establish that during this Bein Hashmoshos they would allow one to tithe questionable produce, which means the produce is questionable whether or not this had previously been tithed. Uma Arvin, the whole institution of an Erev is a rabbinical institution, and so they allow during this time of Bein Hashmoshos to make an Erev, and they can also insulate hot food. The rabbis, what does this mean? The rabbis prohibited insulating or covering hot food with a substance that increases the heat. And the reason for this is because they're concerned that these ashes or coals that are now surrounding it. We're afraid that you're going to mix the coals on Shabbos. And so you're not allowed to, which by mixing this would be kindling on Shabbos. Now, this, of course, is before Shabbos. So coals and things like that increase the heat, you're not allowed to do before Shabbos. However, a blanket or other things like that, which don't increase the heat, but only preserve the heat, so this you're allowed to set up before Shabbos. But on Shabbos, once Shabbos comes, you cannot insulate hot foods on Shabbos. And this is a gezerah de gezerah, because we're afraid that if you were going to allow that, then you're going to think that insulating is allowed on Shabbos, and then you're going to become lax about it and end up using the wrong materials when insulating before Shabbos. However, before Shabbos, a blanket can be used to insulate something. So now, says the Mishnah, but if you're going to you can insulate hot food during the Bein Hashmashos period. On Shabbos proper, you're not allowed to use blankets to insulate the food. Before Shabbos, you're allowed to. And additionally, not only before Shabbos, in the time of Bein Hashmashos, when we don't know if it's Shabbos yet or not, in this particular time, being that there's no prohibition here, it's only a rabbinical prohibition. So the same rabbis that made a prohibition that you can't insulate food on Shabbos are the same rabbis that said that during Bein Hashmashos you can insulate the food. And that, my friends, concludes our study session for this evening. Please join us again next week, same time, and I pray that it's not the same place. We are holding out hope that Hashem will bring an end to this plague. And next week you can join us in Shul or on Facebook at 8:30 for chapter 3 of Masechet Shabbos. Have a very good evening. Stay healthy, stay safe, and stay strong.